This is part one of a video series I am starting that is hopefully going to help you understand your food choices and set up your macros or your lifestyle to make better food choices overall. This video is going to start with the one ingredient diet, and that is a diet that consists of foods that are only one ingredient. So if you look at the ingredient list, it should say one thing. There are some exceptions, but we want to tend to gravitate more towards whole foods. Apples, chicken, milk, anything within that realm will fall under the one ingredient diet. There are some rules that are recommended to follow, and the goal is to help you understand what is in your food, what are you putting in your body, and how is that going to influence your fitness goals, your gym performance, your just general eating habits overall. So first things first, let's start with rule number one: cook everything from scratch. Now, what I mean by cook everything from scratch is that everything that you purchase from the grocery store should be one ingredient and you have to cook it from scratch. That means no other box mixes, no pre-made meals in the freezer. Everything that you make and you want to eat should come from completely 100% whole food sources. Some examples of this could be chicken breast, which is just one ingredient. You have rice, which is just one ingredient. You have broccoli, which is just one ingredient, and oil, which is just one ingredient. This is just a very simple example, but those are a good way to combine different food sources to create an all-encompassing meal. Another example of that could be something like eggs. Eggs is one ingredient, and cheese. Cheese is an exception, and it will have some other things that I'll go into later, but you could take those two foods, eggs and cheese, and combine them to make another meal. Still following this rule, cook everything from scratch. Next rule: fist, palm, and thumb. That is how I tend to gravitate towards portion sizes when it comes to choosing my food size for whatever meal I'm having. So your fist, it's about the size of your fist, hopefully, and that should consist of your vegetable count, or whatever measurement of your vegetables. Broccoli, asparagus, bell peppers, onions, those are all one ingredient. You can cook them all from scratch, and the portion on your plate should consist of about a fist size. Next is your palm. The palm of your hand is a good reference point that you can use to measure out how much protein you could have on your plate. So a chicken breast could be the size of your palm, a steak, a portion of eggs. Any other protein that you can think of will fall under the palm size, and it's still cooking everything from scratch, and it's one ingredient. Now your thumb. Your thumb is actually the end of your thumb. If you see where your knuckle is, the very end of that will be your portion of fats. What I mean by your portion of fats is about a tablespoon of oil. It's probably about the size of your thumb. That'll end up being about 15 grams, which is normally a tablespoon, and that will still fit the cook everything from scratch because it's just oil, or you could use butter or coconut oil. There's lots of different options for fats. It's cooking everything from scratch and one ingredient. Lastly, liquids count. This is the last rule of the one ingredient diet. This is one thing that can often get overlooked, and this includes things like soda, juice, coffee as another big one, because we don't even think about how much that influences our caloric intake in the day. So how are you going to make one ingredient for liquids? I tend to gravitate towards water. Club soda is one of my personal favorites. Just try and limit your intake of fluids that have calories. When we get into later portions of this video series, I'll talk more about how to include liquids in your diet, but this is a good starting point with liquids because having water will not influence your caloric intake. It's one ingredient, and you can use it for cooking. Next is a couple of exceptions that we're going to talk about that still fit in the one ingredient diet that will allow you to cook everything from scratch, fit the portion size, and possibly fall under the liquids count category. To keep things simple, we're just going to follow 5 simple exceptions to the one ingredient diet that will help you in your day-to-day life while still adhering to one ingredient. Rule number 1 is restaurants and fast food. You can still eat out. That sounds great, right? The only exception with that is to use your knowledge that you've gained from cooking things from scratch and reading food labels to find one ingredient, to find the food item on the menu that consists of just as few ingredients as possible. So the teriyaki chicken with teriyaki sauce might not work because we don't know what that teriyaki sauce is made of, but the chicken and rice will totally be fine. The teriyaki sauce can fit into the caloric section that we'll talk about in the next video. Next part are dairy products. And what I mean by dairy products are milk, cheese, and yogurt. Those products are processed, normally don't have just one ingredient, but have different bacterial cultures that actually help them become food. Cheese is an example of that. Yogurt is another as well. Ice cream does not fall under the exception because it does have multiple ingredients, even though it does technically have dairy. So your exceptions on the one ingredient diet for dairy products are going to be milk, either fat-free, 2%, 1%, or whole milk, and yogurt. That could be things like fat-free Greek yogurt and yogurt with as few ingredients as possible. Fortified foods is another very important one that belongs in the exceptions of the one ingredient diet. And that consists of foods like almond milk or tofu because it will have added vitamin C, vitamin D, calcium to the food, but it really just consists of one main food product. So for almond milk, it's mainly based on almonds. Tofu is an soy protein alternative. Spices and salt. Whatever you like to season your food with, feel free to put that in. Rosemary, thyme, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, garlic, anything you can think of that's just a one ingredient spice that totally fits. Salt as well, within reason, of course. However, the exception to that for the one ingredient is avoid spice blends that have added sugar to them. We'll talk about how that will influence your calories later, but just as a general rule of thumb, one ingredient spices are totally fine. Lastly, fermentation. Fermentation is another exception to the one ingredient diet rule because it will consist of a bunch of different ingredients, but essentially is making foods that are really just one ingredient. Things like pickles, kimchi, sauerkraut. Another one of that, if you're a hippie, kombucha. Kombucha is great, but that is some exceptions that you could use for the fermentation. The overall goal behind this is to just consume foods that are one ingredient. I'm not saying that this is something that you need to do for a lifetime. If it is, great, you can use it. But the most important thing is going to be calories, which we're going to talk about in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time in that next video. Bye.